Hey up, friends, it's your pal Chris with a couple of quick announcements before we dive into today's stories. So I just thought you ought to know that Skullgate Media actually has a few books out now. It's not just Achten Tan anymore. We've got Loathsome Voyages, edited by CD Stories and Chris Durston, that's me, which is an anthology of weird fiction encompassing the darkly delightful, the horrifically horrible, the tantalizingly terrible, and everything in between. So think Lovecraft, Vandermeer, malevolent gods, weird dimensions, ancient artifacts, and so on and so forth. Then we have Under New Suns, which is the second volume of our flagship Tales from the Year Between series, and features another brand new collectively created world. This time, instead of the desert city featured in Achten Tan, we follow a sentient spaceship and its crew on bizarre and beautiful journeys, and it's really fantastic, so buy it, thank you. And we also have two of Michael D. Nadau's Lythanol books. I'm sorry, I could probably find out how to pronounce that from somewhere, but I'm doing this in a rush. Anyway, Lythanol books, The Darkness Returns and The Darkness Within are both available from Skullgate now. So basically we have a lot of stories for you to read, so you should, do that. Visit skullgatemedia.com to learn more about all of those things, or if you look on Twitter at Skullgate Media and that sort of thing, then you'll probably see them too. So, of course, eventually the plan for audio presentations like this one is that we'll cover those worlds too, but for now we're continuing to hang out in Achten Tan just for a bit because there's just so darn much of it, and we just don't want you to miss out on any of its juicy barbecue goodness. Oh, and also, we're not stopping where we are at the moment. Oh, no. We're actually looking for contributors to 2 future Skullgate publications right now. So first up is Volume 3 of Tales from the Year Between, which will be loosely themed around pirates and will be another chance for a bunch of strangers to come together and build a whole world collaboratively before writing awesome stories in it. And the other thing is a Winter Wonders themed anthology. So for Year Between, we're looking for people to apply to help us build the universe and then write in it. While for Winter Wonders, it's more like a normal anthology where you write a story and you submit it, and then, there might be a bit of editing, but that's what gets published, basically. In both cases, you will just have the best time, so I highly recommend taking part. Again, details at skullgatemedia.com or on the various social thingies where we're almost always called Skullgate Media or whatever. So, them's the announcements, and now I need to start the actual episode, but all that's going to involve is me doing like a really very, very slightly different voice and pretending to be in a library. So I'm not sure how to do that smoothly, to be honest. Quick piano sting to mask the awkward transition. Oh my goodness, welcome back to the library where I am and so are you, and that's how it's always been, and I've never been anyone else. An esteemed guest today, we welcome someone who claims to be the founder of Skullgate Media, which I assume means he must have had something to do with the adult-themed stage productions the guards over in East Skullgate are suddenly putting on for some reason and charging far too much for entry. Chris Vandyke is here with us to share a few wonderful tales of our beloved city Achten Tan with us, and with no further preamble from me, I shall let him explain the first, A View from the Ribs.
This story is placed at the very end of the year in Achten Tan, and often when I write my stories, I want to take something that's fantastic and just find the human element in it. I'm always interested in stories, whether I'm reading them or writing them, which take place in a truly remarkable, fantastic, amazing setting, and then just deal with normal human emotions like sadness and grief and jealousy. I'm always interested in the people in the background. When reading Lord of the Rings, I'm interested in the hobbits who stayed in Hobbiton. What is their lives like as these epic dramas play out in the background? And so that's what I wanted to do with this story. I was trying to sort of think about just a kid, a teenager, and how the trauma of this year might have affected them and their family. So here is The View from the Ribs. From the top of the Ribs, Achten Tan spreads out before you like a child's block strewn across the desert floor. Toy-sized food stalls by the market and Nord scrappings, toy-sized anchors and Ardyun acolytes rushing to and fro in the disorganized chaos of their days, toy-sized ant riders patrolling the town's perimeter. And in the distance, shrouded by a haze of sunrise-lit dust storm, the massive shape of Skullgate, ivory dull bone glowing pale and white with the dawn. From here, all of it is distant, removed. Which is why you came here, of course. When Mother Eltian comes home high on godfruit paste after a bender at the Twisted Worm and South Ribs, and Mama Keltha can't stop crying and apologizing. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. As if any of it is her fault. And you want to shake them both and tell them how much you love them and how much you hate them, and can't they just stop making everything worse? But you don't have the words, and besides, after everything that's happened these last few months, you honestly can't blame them. Either of them. Not after Ma Eltian saw half her patrol slaughtered by the Third, not after the Savalti returned with Naren's head. Ma Keltha cried over her cousin's brutal death for a week. Eltian, of course, just ate paste and stared at the dull white walls of the apartment. No, you don't blame them. But you can't stay there, not when it feels like the bone walls of your house are about to collapse and smother you. Not when it feels like your skin is going to catch fire or your heart claw its way out of your chest and fling itself at their feet. Not when you can't breathe. The world is ending and you can't breathe, not imprisoned with your mothers and all their pain and grief. All the love that's soured in the absence of hope. So you climb. Trellises and planter boxes and the struts that prop up balconies and awnings make for easy handholds, the ornaments and metalwork of the other residents' abodes, transforming the smooth sweep of the rib into one giant ladder, a ladder you climb almost all the way to heaven. Almost as high as the God Tree. Almost. Not quite, but far enough. Far enough that the chittering of the ants and the stench of tar from the moat doesn't reach this high. That you can no longer hear the chanting of the afflicted sleepers, no longer hear the mutterings of omens. You can't quite touch the stars, but you're not down in the dust either. The wind blows off the plateau from the east, cold and thin, and if you strain your ears, you can hear it sighing through the boughs of the God Tree. Sometimes you imagine there are voices in the wind, incomprehensible words whispering the promise of far-off places. Whispering of the Everfall, of the plains that sent forth the craven and endless waves of fur and blood and death, that sent back the Third. Whispers, what if there's something even further? But you don't come here for what you can hear. You come for what you can't. Up here you can't hear your parents fighting. You pull your parka closer against the chill. At this height the wind is always cold, even during the heat of summer, and it blows from the far-off glaciers and ice that Mama Wiesel used to speak of in her kinder tales. You don't mind the cold. Cold clears the mind. Clears the soul. The wind always blows from the west. Today it whips the sand to howl between the ribs, to scrim the house and shops and stalls with grit, to roil in clouds that shroud the east. But on other days it blows cold and clean. No sand, no clouds. Only the wind blowing east and east and east. On a clear day you can see past Skullgate, past the borders of Achten Tan, past the newly revealed ruins and the canyons with its ominous dome and gate, past the boneyards, past the tar wastes, past and past and past. On a clear day, perched alone atop the ribs, you can see forever.
Ah, delightful. Who among us has not tried to climb to the highest heights of the great long-dead Leviathan, to look out on our beautiful home and felt uplifted by its beauty and also kind of bleakly horrified by all the terrible things that go on here? Ah, a wistful sigh for that. Your next piece, I understand, is something of a companion to your first, so please, continue.
So this story takes place late in the year of Achten Tan, and it's sort of a companion piece to A View from the Ribs, and has sort of a similar goal in mind, which is to look at how these events would have affected individual people. That's usually what I like to read and I like to write when I think of fantasy worlds. We have these amazing, exciting, but ultimately traumatic events playing out. And that would cause what we know as PTSD, that these events would not be fun to live to, as much fun as they are to read about. And so here, this is actually character Eltian, who is also the mother of the narrator of A View from the Ribs. And she has seen her companions killed throughout the year. She's one of the antras, she's an ant writer, and she's seen her companions die, and this is her sort of dealing with it by descending into drug abuse. the god paste that was introduced into the book. So this is Fire and Peace. Just 2 measures of Drathfire paste. The wizened figure who ran the stall dipped a wooden ladle into a barrel and carefully filled a clay jar with rust-red sludge. With deft movements that belied her frail form, the old woman covered the jar with a swath of oiled worm hide and tied it with a bit of sinew. Eltian could almost taste the paste on her tongue, could almost feel the harsh burn down her throat, and the peace that followed the fire. Somewhere a Bashdun sang out the hour, and the chaos and cacophony round her paused briefly as the deep ululations wafted from the peak of the rib to settle on the marketplace. For a moment there was no movement, no chatter, no clatter of coin and bone and mirror, shards exchanging hands, only dust and breathing in heat, and silence. The final throbbing note faded, and like a femur Ulna bent too far, the silence snapped and the bazaar sprang to life once again. "That'll be 2 shards and a knuckle, dearie, or 1 heckle if you got it." Eltian reached into her purse. For a moment she hesitated. She thought of Cletha's face, her wife's brown eyes wide and wet with disappointment when she stumbled back into the apartment, her breath heavy with paste. How Cletha wouldn't say a word. Wouldn't be angry, wouldn't be fucking anything, and how that would make it worse. And Oren, how he'd sit in the corner while she raged at Cletha, as if he could turn invisible, as if he could sink through the bone floor of the apartment. But she also thought of the fire and the peace, the silence. She fished out 2 thin fragments of glass and a cracked bone. Eltian always hesitated, but she always paid. The old woman took the payment and slid the jar across the wooden counter. The contents sloshed enticingly. Eltian licked her lips and swallowed. "Pardon me, dearie." The old woman peered up at her from beneath the wide cowl of her robe. "And forgive an old woman if it ain't my place, but perhaps this ain't what you need to be bringing home right now." Eltian's face darkened. "You don't know what I need, old woman." The figure held up a hand. "Peace? Now you got the right to do as you choose, no mistake. Guy's been selling pace since you were knee-high to an answer mount, and if I ain't mistaken, and I ain't ashamed at all, I've seen it bring solace and comfort and jubilation, mark births and weddings and wakes. But I've seen it swallow lives whole as well, seen it eat families and futures like there was ribs, and lick its fingers and go back for seconds." The milky eyes rested on Eltian's forearm, where the marital tattoo marked her bond to Cletha. The ink was blue and faded from decades under the hot sun, but the lines were as clean and crisp as the day they'd been wed. "Perhaps, dearie, my stall tain't where you need to be today." She nodded her head to indicate the maze of stalls and carts of the market. "Mayhap there's something out there you should be taking home to your wife. A peace offering." Eltian stared at the old woman. "A peace offering?" "Why, something that speaks to her." "Speaks to her?" Eltian laughed a thin, brittle laugh. "And what, when it speaks, says, 'I'm sorry your cousin joined a cult. I'm sorry he ran off into the fucking desert. And I'm sorry he had his fucking head cut off.'" Her laughter cut off abruptly. "Can you suggest anything in the market that might say that?" Before the old woman could respond, Eltian grabbed the jar and walked away. In a moment, she was swallowed up by the crowd.
Now, sir, if I know you, there'll certainly be more interesting examinations of such matters as good, evil, motivations, nuance, darkness, and so on in your work. So what do you have for us next?
A note found in the abandoned Craven City. So one of the framing devices for Achten Tan was that the city of Achten Tan had recently been facing years and years, some unknown period of time, of conflict with this sort of unknown group called the Craven, which really was a name that I, as sort of, to start the game, I just pulled out of thin air and plopped down to say we'd been fighting these things called the Craven, and that we had just recently had a respite from years of war. And there was sort of question what they were. And so at some point, I think I described them as sort of rat-like creatures. I was specifically thinking of the Skaven from the Warhammer series. And then at one point in the story, they this group called the Third had this sort of prophecy. They had a vision that there was a better place, and they left and went towards actually the Craven lands. And in one of my turns, I had them find an abandoned Craven city. And I was trying to think, as I always try to think in my pieces, sort of what is the motive of like the bad guy, like the unknown, the other, who have their own society. There aren't evil in my conception of fantasy worlds. There's no such thing as an evil race. Orcs aren't evil. There's got to be. They have children. They have lives. There's some reason for them to exist. They have art. They have hopes and dreams. And so I was trying to think, who were these Craven? They originally sort of were posited as like the goblins. They were the other that had just, the mindless hordes that had attacked us, but that couldn't be it. So I tried to sort of flip that on its head with this piece, and that's what we have. And so this is a note found by one of the Third, one of the people when they were exploring the abandoned Craven city, and it sort of gives a context to the years of war. All right, and I've probably talked longer than this piece will be itself. All right, so this is a note found in the abandoned Craven city. It starts, it says, discovered by Eltian Lap, author unknown. You called us Craven. That wasn't a name we gave ourselves. You bestowed it upon us, as your tongues could not wrap themselves around our consonant and vowels, our syllabication. We called ourselves the people, but then doesn't every tribe? You hated us. With reason, I suppose, as we waged war on you for generations. Blood and bone and fur as we flung ourselves at your city. It wasn't what we wanted. At first, we sent ambassadors with gifts to beg, beseech, to warn. But you couldn't understand our language. Our overtures were interpreted as offense, and you slaughtered us out of fear. Tragic. Not inexplicable, but tragic. We sent more, this time armed and cautious, but again they were killed, gutted and left to die in the desert far from the homeland. Thus, war. This was long ago in the days of my father's father's father, when the blood shamans first saw the signs, when the haruspecs and augurs read the entrails and stars and learned the truth of your god tree. We tried, first with supplication and then with steel, but neither words nor swordplay worked. We failed. And so the world will die. We are, even as I scribe this, a dead people. A colony of ants on a piece of bark sent down the everflow. We whirl and gyre a while longer yet, but our doom is coming. It is already here. When you find this, know that your end is nigh upon you as well. Nafer vim Kazim, I believe you call it. The doom of the gods. This is no longer a warning, as the time for that has passed. Merely an utterance of the truth. The eulogy for both our people. Weep or laugh or flail about in paroxysms of remorse. It matters not. Return to your town, lie with your wives and husbands, kiss your offspring. Know that we never hated you. We only wish you heard us and understood.
And I think there must be one more. Perhaps something of a fairy tale, not simply told by those looking in on our world, but by those living within it. Do tell.
This story takes place really anywhere during the year that unfolds during Achten Tan. It's one that's not really tied to a specific spot, but it's more tied to this character, Synagogue, who came up in the gameplay as sort of this worm wizard. And I just wanted to do something with that character more as like a folk tale. I wasn't quite sure whether the Synagogue was an actual character in the world that we'd created or a myth. And so I sort of took her or him or it, I was never quite sure, as a character that might be talked about as like a boogeyman by the people in Achten Tan, and this is what I did with it. All right, this is The Girl in Synagogue. A long time ago, when the world was new and the ribs still shone smooth and white. The ribs was never shiny. Oh, shush, that's just the way these stories start. But they always start that way, Mana, and you always interrupt, so hush or you won't get a story at all. Anyhow, there once was a young girl. Now, this particular girl lived here in Achten Tan in Skullgate. She was an orphan, but she had been taken in by a kindly old bonesmith who was known far and wide for crafting the finest armor in all the wastes. Anchors came from North Ribs and South Ribs and Godtree to buy his wares. Now, one day the bonesmith sent the young girl to collect bones from the fields north of town. Mind you, said he, gather the bones and hurry back. Don't talk to anyone you meet and be back before nightfall. And so the girl went into the fields to gather bones. The day was hot, and gathering bones is hard work. When the sun was high, she sat in the shade of a massive femur to have her lunch. She was tired, and the shade was cool. It won't hurt if I close my eyes for a wee bit, she thought. Don't do it, it'll end badly. Oh, shut it, Orin, she can't hear you. You shut it, Garen. Both of you shut it or you shan't hear the ending. I already know the ending. So you'd like me to stop telling and just send you to bed? No, Mana Weisel, we'll be good, promise. Cross your hearts and hope to be eaten by worms. Yes, Mana, promise. Okay, then where was I? The girl was closing her eyes. Ah, yes. It won't hurt if I close my eyes for a wee bit, she thought. But instead of a wee bit, the girl fell fast asleep. When she woke, it was night. Neither moon was up, so the world was dark as dark can be. She looked around, but she was lost. Oh no, she cried. How will I ever make it back to my home now? Just then she saw a light in the distance, moving betwixt the bones. As she watched, the light slowly drew closer and closer until she saw a cloaked figure carrying a lantern. The girl remembered the bonesmith's warning not to talk to anyone she met. But she was more scared of being lost than of any stranger, so she cried out, Help me, I'm lost and cannot find my way home. The figure stopped and turned, and the girl realized it was Synagogue, the wicked half-elf wizard who lived in the bog. Synagogue drew back her hood, and her dark hair framed her bone-white face as she said, Oi, what do you mean she? Synagogue was a boy. Not when Aw tells it she isn't. But Synagogue was a wizard, you said it yourself, and there ain't no girl wizards. Yeah, them's called witches. There are 2 girl wizards, Synagogue for start. But when Mama Cletha tells it, well, go then and find your mom and have her tell it, and I'll go have a cup of tea and a pipe by myself. No, don't stop. We'll stop interrupting, right, Orin? Okay, I'll stop. But Synagogue won't know. Ow! I said, right, Orin. Right, I'll be quiet. Synagogue said, You must be a brave one, being such a wee girl as you are and being all alone in the bone wastes at night. Now the girl did not feel at all brave right at that moment, but she nodded. And you must be a special sort of brave to hail Synagogue. Did your parents not warn you about the wizard of the fetid bog? Now the girl thought of pointing out that she had not known the figure was Synagogue when she first called to her, and had she known it was the half-elf wizard, she may have stayed silent and tried to find her way home on her own, but it was too late now, and she feared saying anything would anger the wizard. Please, ma'am, she said, I just want to get home to Achten Tan. It is late, and the bonesmith is expecting me. Synagogue is not a nursemaid, child, and I do not work for free. The price of a wizard's aid is steep. The girl held out the sack of bones she had gathered. You can have these, she said. Synagogue laughed and pointed to the desert. I have all the bones my heart could desire, little one. What else do you have? The girl undid her kerchief that held her lunch. I have a bit of cheese and bread. You can have that. Again the wizard laughed. I have not needed to eat the food of mortals for many a long year, child. What else have you? The girl shook her head. That's all I have. I'm but a poor orphan. I have nothing else save the shift on my back and the shoes at my feet, and you cannot leave me to walk naked through the desert. Synagogue peered at the girl and licked her lips. Well, that is not all you have, my pretty little one. The girl suddenly felt very afraid. I may have no need for cheese or bread, but I am always hungry. So hungry. Synagogue opened her mouth wide, wider than was possible, and her teeth were sharp. Before the girl could scream, Synagogue gobbled her up. All that was left on the sand was her sack of bones and one lonely shoe. The end, time for bed. What? That's not the way it ends. Yes, it is. No, it's not. The girl tricks Synagogue into swallowing a bone, and Synagogue starts choking, and the girl says she'll save her if she promises to help her, and then no, that ending is a lie. It is told by soft parents to help their soft children sleep at night. Mademoiselle, why would you tell us such a horrible thing? Because it is the truth. And the truth is often a horrible, scary thing. But now we'll never get to sleep. No, but you will stay awake and listen for the dark things that creep in the night. And that is good. Now good night, children. I won't say sleep tight. Don't sleep at all. Stay awake. But if you make it to dawn, it will have been a good night indeed. Good night. Good night.
And there you have it, the words of Chris Vandyke encapsulating the strange wonder of Achten Tan in a glimmering jewel with many facets and many edges, so that each person who looks into it might see something different. Different worlds or different views of the same. Who knows? Perhaps neither or both. We thank our friend Chris Vandyke for coming to read his tales. He is the founder and president of Skullgate Media and started Tales from the Year Between because he was bored and it seemed like a good idea at the time. You can see things he writes at cvandyke.com and follow him on Twitter at aboutrunning, and of course visiting yearbetween.com or skullgatemedia.com or visiting any of Skullgate Media's various social medias is also a pretty good way of staying up to date with what he's up to. Thank you again for coming, and we at the Great Library hope you enjoyed your stay. Sounds from the Year Between is a production of Skullgate Media, the new independent writers collective / indie publisher with big dreams of all kinds of things. This podcast is produced by Dee Gagliardi and Chris Durston, ably assisted by Chris Vandyke. This episode was hosted and edited by Chris Durston, and any music you might have heard in the background of the episode was improvised by me for fun. Sounds from the Year Between is the podcast companion to Tales from the Year Between, our biannual anthology series where each volume is set in a new, collectively created world, and as I mentioned, there are two of them now, Achten Tan and Under New Suns, and both are fantastic for completely different reasons. Go to skullgatemedia.com or yearbetween.com to learn more and buy our books because they're very good, or follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, and TikTok, all as Skullgate Media. Today's stories were A View from the Ribs, Fire and Peace, A Note Found in the Abandoned Craven Sissy, and The Girl and Synagogue, and all of those stories appear in Achten Tan, Land of Dust and Bone. That's Volume 1 of Tales from the Year Between. Take care, stay safe, and don't forget to enjoy the view.